All right, it's time for the championship week edition of the PFF forecast. I'm George. Eric is here. Today, we're going to do a quick recap of the division round, really just that ridiculous Vikings Saints game. We're going to introduce a new segment, have a nice sponsor for that one as well. New Year, New Me makes a return. Offensive defense rankings are our deep dive this week. And of course, lock of the week will be here. Eric over there in sunny San Diego, how are you?
I'm doing well, nice and rested. Had a great time watching the divisional round, even though things didn't quite work out for us in some of our picks. And I'm really excited for what this weekend has in store.
And it's your birthday, so I should extend a warm, one day closer to the end type thing.
My age has doubled 5 times since I've been alive.
Nice. I was worried we weren't going to have a math joke, but we did, thank God.
Yeah.
I still think the PFF minus forecast was pretty brilliant. Anyways, so let's talk about last week. I think that's the best place to start. We, of course, had our lock of the week, the Saints +5. In case you forgot, the score ended 29-24. But what I thought was most interesting was when I asked you, what did the Vikings need to be winning by going into the fourth quarter for you to feel confident? And you said, what'd you say again?
I said 11, and I said it's because the Saints had to do 3 things correctly as opposed to 2, and as it would happen, the Vikings went into the fourth quarter with a 10-point lead, and if it wasn't for an amazing sort of miracle-like play, the Saints would have won by 1, making that 11 points, I think, a spot-on Vikings scar-ridden handicap.
Yeah, you would have been, you would have been destroyed by all of your Minnesota Vikings Skol fan base for, obviously that would have been a terrible jinx. And it took what was a miraculous play. I was sitting there watching the game, obviously for the first 3 quarters, I was pretty devastated. I obviously want our lock of the week to win, but the game opened at 3.5 and got all the way to 5.5. So I had all of this different liability from 3.5. I bought in at the money line. I bought in at 5.5 finally. So my range of emotions throughout that game finally culminating in them actually, being up and me thinking that all of these bets were going to hit. It was brutal. I just put my head down and said, "This is why you don't bet on games."
When the Vikings kicked their second to last field goal to go up 20-14, we were at a family's house here, and I turned to my wife. I'm like, "This game ends 21-20." Like, I just have known, too much. I've watched too many Vikings games to know that that was going to happen, and luckily, I guess if you're a Vikings fan, luckily it did not.
And the amazing thing about this whole, the very last play might have been the craziest part, especially for people who, woke up on Sunday and decided to put some money down based on where the line went, because it got past 5. It was 5.5, and of course, we owe a very somber apology to one Kai Forbath.
We are retiring the Kai Forbath Memorial Extra Point, which was birthed in week 2. If people don't remember our picks, in week 1 we picked New Orleans, Minnesota over 48, which the game ended 29-19, and so it ended up being a push for us in our first week, and it was due to a Kai Forbath wide right extra point. And so so as kind of a way to, I don't know, laugh at our misfortune, we named the Kai Forbath Memorial Extra Point, kind of made its way into a few of our articles this year. And thank God Kai did not come back out. He was one of many players who decided to mail it in after the touchdown had scored. So we're going to retire the Kai Forbath Memorial Extra Point because his lack of making that last extra point actually gave us a push when we probably should have gotten an L there.
Sure. Though I like to look at it the other way, which was it took a ridiculous play by Case Keenum, a ridiculous play by Stephon Diggs, and an unbelievable play by Marcus Williams to lose that for us. So I'm less bullish on giving Kai Forbath any credit for this. There is also, I also, I feel bad for this because I like to be on the cutting edge of trends, and it somehow escaped me that we should have looked back to the last time that Vikings went up against a European country that thought they were Christian saints, and how the Vikings ended up jumping on the back of a strong leader probably named Leif or something like that, and overcame. And of course Case shows up, and this should have been, I should have been on this, but I apologize for missing that trend. Trends, of course, remain undefeated, especially when you find them after something has happened.
Those are the best ones, really. Those are the best ones. The going back and explaining what happened with what happened is, priceless.
And an analogous situation, because I bet Case directly descends from, Leif Erikson or whoever it was. Anyways, we promise next time we'll uncover that before. Moving right along, new segment. This is one of your favorite segments, I think. We're going to call it the Unstable Stat of the Week. We've been searching for a sponsor. We found one. Uranium is going to sponsor the Unstable Stat of the Week. I think that's fair. They called in late and they're like, we heard about this new segment. We got to make sure we're in on it. So Uranium sponsoring the Unstable Stat of the Week. And the reason we like to talk about unstable stats of the week is that oftentimes they are used as reason why you should do one thing or another. And that's not a good thing, because if it's unstable, there's a pretty good chance it tilts the other way the next time around. And this week, near and dear to your heart, we return to Case Keenum. The unstable stat of the week, Case Keenum under pressure. What was his pass rating under pressure this last week, Eric?
So Case Keenum this week under pressure against the New Orleans Saints had a 5.1 passer rating, not 5.1 yards per attempt, but 5.1 passer rating when pressured. He was 3 for 11 for 42 yards, and that outrageous falling backwards interception to Marcus Williams, actually, that helped put the Saints back in the game after they had scored their first touchdown. So that is that, and so I tweeted that out and got a lot of Philadelphia Eagles fans. I got their blood flowing, let's say, about that, and the fact that Philadelphia has one of the best defensive lines in football, and there's sort of blood in the water now. So Case Keenum was pretty bad under pressure against the Saints. Now, on the other hand, he had a 116.1 passer rating against the Saints when clean, and so we're kind of saying, okay, well, passer rating when clean, we talked about that last week, is 4 times more stable than passer rating when pressured. So chances are, even if he does face a decent amount of pressure from a good Eagles defense this week, we're probably more likely to see something like his 74 passer rating when pressured on the season than the 5.1 he had against the Saints.
Yeah, and if you look obviously if something is unstable, game to game, it's going to fluctuate a ton. And if you look at his pass rating under pressure game to game, it does just that, but it's never catastrophically terrible. This 5.1 is, it's obviously terrible. You just spike the ball at 39.6. And he's been, his low has basically been in those mid 60s, which is, league average. And then he's got these spikes where, he throws a touchdown or whatever under pressure, makes a really, really good play and gets, over, 100 or so. So I think it's fair to say 5.1 under pressure, probably not what we expect again this week. Just a hunch there. But speaking of getting the Philadelphia Eagle fans' blood flowing, apparently you just have to get on a subway after an Eagles game, and that automatically happens.
Right, wearing maybe opposing colors, for example.
Yeah. Or if whatever. I'll let the people that understand that joke enjoy it, and the people that don't will be blissfully ignorant. Though, is if there was a team, you'd figure the Eagles probably the best equipped to put, the kind of pressure that would ultimately make Case have a tough time under pressure. So,
yep, and in the last time that the Eagles and the Vikings played, it was week 7 of 2016, and Sam Bradford did face a ton of pressure that game, and he he had something like a 30 passer rating that day, and it sort of stopped what was a 5-game winning streak for the Vikings, and really sort of showed, I think, a lot of instabilities in the Vikings offense that kind of persisted for the rest of the season. So it is certainly possible that the Eagles put the kind of pressure on Case Keenum that will make their offense suboptimal. But there are other things, for example, Minnesota's strength on the outside with Thielen and Diggs versus what is, I think, the weaker part of the Philadelphia defense, their outside cornerbacks that I think will somewhat mitigate and keep Case Keenum from having such a poor outing when under pressure in this one.
Beautiful. That was Unstable Side of the Week. Nice. Good debut. Next, a return. New year, new me. We're coming back. Very successful last week because we discussed the Tennessee exotic smash mouth and their, for some unknown reason, love of running on second and long. And what happened? Unfortunately, Mike Malarkey apparently didn't listen to our podcast, idiot, and paid the ultimate price, getting fired, which I think is a little harsher than we expected for people who didn't listen to the podcast. But nonetheless, it was pretty obvious. So when they passed on second and long, 6 yards per play, including a touchdown, and when they ran on second and long, 4.4 yards per play, no TDs. So I'll let that lie.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, yeah. So maybe one more listener to the podcast this week will keep somebody from losing their job. We're a job creator here, so, or at least a job maintainer here. So, yeah, listen up.
Yes, that was unfortunate. Poor guy. R.I.P. to Mike Malarkey. This week, though, the New Year, New Me, New Year's resolution goes out to someone near and dear to our hearts because we've read the Atlanta Falcons so many times this year, and much to our detriment, the Dan Quinn fourth down decision-making / offensive tactics that the Falcons have employed, we'd like them this new year to sort of have I don't know what the best word is for it, but a rejuvenation of their intestinal fortitude, maybe? I don't know. How would you put it?
Well, I got to put another shirt on while you're talking here because the other one I just already sweat through the other one. But I would say more just like being progressive in terms of viewing the game of football is probably a nice way of putting it.
That works. So the big thing that that bugged me was these constant decisions to kick field goals almost automatically, not even considering going for it with the best, one of the best offenses in the NFL. And you look this up and you've got some great stats for us. So give it to me. I'm ready.
Yeah. So there were 12, I would consider iffy decisions to kick a field goal this year. So for example, I think against Minnesota, they were down 14-9 late in the fourth quarter, and it was 4th and 4 from the 20, and then they missed a field goal. So it ended up, being even in hindsight a worse decision, but decisions like that, 4th and 1 at the 30, kicking a field goal instead of going for it. And there was 12 of those decisions this season that I looked at in the play-by-play data, which is interesting because that's 2 every 3 games or something like that. Right. So that's actually relatively frequent. And when we used our expected points model, that cost the Falcons 7 full expected points this year, which doesn't seem like a lot, but in a league where 30 to 40 expected points is a win, you're talking about, a decent fraction of a win this season just by simply making better decisions on 4th down. So that, that is one, thing where I think that they can improve just by simply saying, okay, we have one of the league's best quarterbacks, one of the league's best receivers, and a pair of running backs that, many teams would die to have, and a good offensive line. And we're deciding to, take, 3 points, which is not always guaranteed, versus the opportunity to score 7, which what's true about 7, George?
Let me look this up. I have this written down somewhere. Here it is. 7 is greater than 3 plus 3, which checks out.
That's profound. Checks out. Profound. Probably should be the guiding basis for, the field goal happy Dan Quinn and the Falcons.
We wish them just a much more profitable year in 2018. I think that. Go ahead.
Can you imagine being a Falcons fan this year? I think one of our friends, Charles McDonald on Twitter said, one of the hardest parts about being a Falcons fan is that they're never bottom out. They always sort of they put you in that position, and we've seen this all year, right? They're they're just good enough where the market hates them and our model likes them, and we can convince ourselves that they're a good bet. And yet, like when you watch their games, you're just like, there's just something missing here. And, I think a lot of it is sort of red zone efficiency and, and just kind of like, production from the supporting cast, which was there in 2016, not so much in 2017. But, I think it's these decisions that can, drive you crazy. A really good drive. And then, for example, what happened at the end of the Philadelphia game could really, drive you nuts.
The Sweatlanta Falcons, never a better nickname. I'm going to give you full credit for that. And you mentioned that four down sequence there to win the game, and you almost expected that an offense this good would score a touchdown there. They had to. It was their season. And they, the first play they ran a fade. They'd thrown 3 fades inside the 10 all year, and went 1 for 3. So you choose that play. Okay, great. You run a fade. Then they ran a halfback, shovel/screen to Ron Ward. You have Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman, and you put Ward in there to run that play. They'd run one of those inside the 10 all year. So, be that what it may. They then threw a slant. They'd gone 0 for 2 targeting slants all year inside the 10-yard line. And then finally on 4th down, the play that I think is getting the most criticism, and maybe unduly so, is that sprint right, basically cutting off half of the field, where they'd actually been pretty successful inside the 10. They'd gone 4 for 5. Ryan had gone 4 for 5 when running either out to the left or out to the right inside the 10-yard line. But it's one of those things where, in my opinion at least, that's a high volatility play, and I would rather call that not as my very last play because it cuts off half the field.
Well, and the funny thing about that play is actually Matt Ryan made a terrific play because the Julio Jones fell down. The play, I think the secondary receiver was otherwise not open, and Ryan did a fantastic job of sort of stopping and like letting the play redevelop. And ultimately he threw a perfect pass to Julio Jones, and it just went through his hands. It's just sort of another example of like, there's just like, it's just something for the Falcons in 2017. And in that one, it was, the fact that their best receiver, the perennial leading the league in yards per route run, he simply just, doesn't make the catch against a far weaker player in Jalen Mills. So yeah, but it was good to put a bow on the 2017 Sweatlanta Falcons season, I think.
Yes, there's only so much more that we could take from that team. Oh, man. And it aptly happened once everyone hopped on the bandwagon. So, new year, new me, Dan Quinn. Hopefully you're listening, and Mike Malarkey, and you don't go fishing next year. Fair. Anyways, next we are moving on. We really need sponsors to break this up. So, obviously, getting a lot of calls from sponsors. Keep them coming. We'll,
get at us
on a case-by-case basis. We'll enter you into the podcast. Next, we're going to roll into the big picture topic this week. Last week, we talked about PFF ELO and what goes into that, how it affects our thinking on a week-to-week basis. And this week, we're going to break it down into a little more facet-oriented rankings with our PFF Massey rankings. So, Eric, take it away.
Yeah, this is a lot like, what we did with ELO, where, we have, I think, so Kenneth Massey, who's currently a professor at Carson Newman in Tennessee, he, developed a ranking during his undergraduate thesis at Bluefield College. But basically the idea is to try to rank teams based upon, a season-long sort of schedule order independent way. And the idea here being, you basically look at, build a matrix where, whether you play a team, how many times you play a team sort of go in the columns. And then there's a strength metric that you solve for. And without, PFF grades was using points for and against in his original model. And so what we did this offseason was take our PFF grades and scale them according to how important the different facets were. So passing, receiving, coverage, those types of things. and solve for that. And what I like about this ranking system specifically is that it allows you to split offense and defense in a way that ELO will not, and so that makes it really useful for things like adjusting passing grades for opponents. Makes it really useful for looking at how to project over-unders, because as we talked about last week, the PFF ELO model is more of a team strength, but as you'll see in the two championship games this week, one championship game has an over-under of like 46.5. One championship game has an over-under of about 38.5, and obviously like those, the Vikings are, somewhat as good as the Patriots, but it's obviously comes about in a different way. And so, disentangling offense and defense is super useful there. And so, yeah, that's basically what we've done. What's really interesting and sort of like looking at the sort of the history of, sort of rankings and ratings is that Kenneth Massey is a different person than Cade Massey, who is responsible for the Massey Peabody rankings and model and everything like that. So I found that to be interesting. But yeah, we're basically working off, sort of that algorithm, which, is a little bit more involved than the ELO model, but every bit is sort of easy to implement once you have the PFF grades.
So you're saying if my last name is Massey, then I should be an innovator in the world of mathematics, basically. Seems like a pretty foolproof trend, in my opinion.
I feel like you'll get the benefit of the doubt, right? So, hey, I'm Massey. Yeah. So that they'll just go with whatever you say, in that space.
Here's my book. Enjoy it. Yeah, those are great. And that what's cool about it, as you mentioned, is the ability to add like a little layer of context to when we look at the like team overall rankings, right? And I think for the over/under, those Massey rankings have a much higher importance in terms of the features that we use to predict over/unders, which obviously makes sense because it's less about what the spread is going to be and more about how many points we're going to score, obviously. So
yeah, interestingly, when you look at sort of when you look at some of these things, some of the what you can get here is actually a pretty decent look at like how difficult a team's opposing schedule was. So last week when we talked about the Tennessee Titans having the 32nd most difficult swath of opposing offenses, it was basically because we just took all the Massey rankings of the offenses they faced, added them up, and took the average, and they're like, oh wow, like they haven't really played anybody. So I think that's a better way of sort of like looking at sort of being more grainy with what you're doing and sort of contextualizing. And then obviously Tennessee struggled against New England's offense for much of Saturday's game, and so again, as you said, George, adds a little bit of context to what we're doing.
They're good. They're awesome. So that's our big picture deep dive into another piece of the overall, I don't know, feature space, I guess we would call it, that we use. And next week, and we got to think of something good for the Super Bowl lead up, but we'll have some good stuff for you. And now, time for some predictions. Best part of the entire podcast. Before we get into this week, though, let's do a quick rehash of last week. Playoffs so far, our locks are 1-0, and thanks to the ridiculousness in Minneapolis, that one push. Last week, couple places where I think there were some, unfortunate situations that went on. Pittsburgh, -7, -7.5, depending where you were at. Our model shaded towards Pittsburgh, also like the over, which, came through in spades. But when you see the way that game turned out, does it feel more like error in process or just, the randomness that we've come to expect with the NFL?
I think at some level we can be pretty happy with the fact that Pittsburgh only lost by 3 when they gave up a decent amount on the ground to the Jaguars, which doesn't matter. They had 2 sort of missteps on 4th down. when they sort of had an outside run on a fourth down early in the game that didn't work, and a very like weird crossing route thing 20 yards downfield to Juju Smith-Schuster on another fourth down in Jacksonville territory. On the other hand, as we said with the over kind of discussion, Pittsburgh's defense is a lot worse than I think even our metrics were able to sort of uncover the last, like, let's say month to 6 weeks of the season. And Jacksonville really did take advantage of that. Blake Bortles was very efficient, a passer rating of over 100 when kept clean, a passer rating of about 100 when under pressure, or sorry, when using play action. And so, in terms of sort of trying to handicap that game, there was just a lot of moving parts. And I think to some degree we got that, we did get that wrong. I don't think it was sort of just randomness that got Jacksonville not only to the window with a cover, but also to an outright win.
Being harsh, I like it. We got to be our own worst critic. I mean, here's the thing: those fourth down play calls, and I think this ties in nicely with the New Orleans game because it reminded me of that Willie Snead wide receiver pass, that pass to Juju Smith-Schuster over the middle on 4th and 1. That's a great play, right? And they almost executed it to perfection. Big Ben made a really nice throw. The New Orleans play, it was a brilliantly designed play, but in the context that it was, that it was used, it just doesn't make a ton of sense because there's such high variance in that play that anything short of the optimal situation or the optimal outcome results in you, getting rid of the ball, right? In New Orleans' case, they were going to punt, so they weren't going to go for it on 4th and 1, which I think is the only scenario in which that play really makes sense right there. And then for Pittsburgh, right, even if they gain 20 yards, which is great, I mean, look, the alternative is that they get rid of the ball. So, I think two things that were particularly frustrating in the New Orleans situation. I've talked about this a million times, right? I love Sean Payton. I love the aggressiveness that he calls games with, and you take the good and the bad, I think, in those situations.
Yeah, I think what's interesting here is that nothing's static in the NFL, right? Like that Willie Snead pass is a good play on 1st and 2nd down, or even on 3rd down where you're committed to going for it on 4th down. It's a bad play when you're not committed to going for it on 4th down and he throws an incompletion. Same thing with Ben Roethlisberger, sort of either throwing the ball on a crossing route to Juju Smith-Schuster or, throwing a sort of a toss sweep out to Le'Veon Bell. And that's where, I think a lot of these things on the margins they go from being decent decisions to sort of awful ones. And, those ultimately cost us in our picks last week.
Oh, well, I'm not going to sit here and be a couch coach, but painful. I promise you this: next year, when you're listening to this podcast, I will make the exact same argument for Sean Payton, and it will pay off. Bet.
57% of the time.
Which is great. I'll take those any day.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to this week. Two great games. First, the non-lock of the week, which is your beloved Minnesota Vikings and Case Leif Eriksen Keenum rolling into Philadelphia. Here's the bad news. You ready for the bad news? They are 3-point favorites. And history tells us 3-point favorites going into Philadelphia 0-1. They've lost 100% of the games in this year's playoffs when going into that situation. Does that worry you?
So you're talking about last week?
Yes. Very recent history. Perfectly analogous situation. In fact, one of the teams is the same as the other
exact
game.
Same team.
Yeah, so I mean, it's pretty much a flawless trend. I don't know what your issue could be. Anyways, let's hit this one real quick. So 3 points. Our model likes, would shade Philly. We have it about 2.5. Over under 39. Model likes the over a little bit there, but we're not super confident about it. So tell me why, and then give me the best matchup here, where you think the game will turn.
Right. So 3 is a tough number because that's, obviously if Minnesota wins by a field goal, it's a push. At 3.5, with our number being 2.5, there's some value there. Obviously, with Minnesota winning by a field goal, you can get to the window with a bet on, Philadelphia plus 3.5. So there's really not a ton of value at 3.5. The over under being at 39, our numbers being 40, you can, obviously it's difficult for a model to sort of get an under 39. So I don't know if there's a ton of value there. Where I see the biggest matchup, obviously, is Minnesota's offense, where you have one of the best supporting casts in the league with Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen, Thielen a little banged up, against the Philadelphia defense, who on the outside has Jalen Mills, Ronald Darby a little bit weaker, but everywhere else on the defense, whether that be Malcolm Jenkins at safety, Nigel Bradham at linebacker, or their entire sort of stout front four, has an advantage over Minnesota. So it's really an interesting matchup. Since our numbers are not particularly different than Vegas's number, there's not a ton of value there. And so unfortunately, you probably have to sort of lay off this game if you want to, if you are inclined to sort of bet on football. This is one that you kind of want to ignore.
And those are the types of wonderful, upstanding people that we are talking to. So we're cautioning you against this one. That being said, just from like an interest in this game standpoint, I think that matchup very interesting. The big guy Steve Palazzolo wrote a wonderful piece talking about the kind of key stat that he pulled out of our QB annual, which by the way, if you don't have, you're blowing it and you need to go get it. That he thinks will sort of dictate what happens in each of these games. And one of the ones that he picked out for this game is Case Keenum, under pressure, has been sacked at the second lowest rate in the NFL, essentially saying, look, even when under duress, he's able to at least get an attempt off or, make a positive run as opposed to getting sacked. And we know that, things under pressure generally unstable. So if he can continue to do that kind of incredible thing that, we see fluctuate a lot, obviously big for Minnesota. And if that Philly defensive line gets to him, well, maybe Nick Foles will rise again. Who knows? Drum roll, please.
I'm not putting my money on it, by the way.
Well, I never put my money on this because I worry about it too much as is. So my dry fits fully sweated through regardless of my monetary investment. It's time, though. Lock of the week. The lock of the week this week is brought to you by ABC's The Bachelor, because when you find true love, it's for life.
Lock it up.
Same with the lock of the week.
Farmersonly.com, get at us.
Yes, they were an honorable mention this week. Didn't bring the checkbook. Hopefully next week they'll make it happen for the Super Bowl. But as we usually do, we're going to hit you with the counterpoint first. And the counterpoint for this week will be telling me why New England won't be able to cover -8 at home against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So, doomsday scenario. I'm crying in the third quarter. Tell me why.
Yeah, I think it's just because, Jacksonville has the defense, whether that be, up front with the Calais Campbells and then Yannick Ngakwe's and Malik Jackson's, the linebackers with Telvin Smith, Miles Jack, the defensive backfield with A.J. Boye, Jalen Ramsey, and Barry Church. They have the kind of defense that can hold any team into the 10 to 17 point range. And, unless that team gets out to a 10-0, 17-0 lead, it's going to be very hard to cover an 8-point spread. So I see, the only reason that, we could see possibly New England not covering this is if Jacksonville's defense simply put the clamps on New England's offense to the degree that the game is so low scoring that an 8-point spread, such a cover is, unlikely. But we like New England because they seem to exploit the weaknesses in every team. And where do we see weaknesses in the Jaguars, George?
I've been burned by calling Blake Bortles a weakness before. That's for sure. So I'm not going to do it again this week. Here's what I'm going to say. Tom Brady, better quarterback than Blake Bortles. I feel fairly
God,
confident in
bold.
saying that. Yeah,
Ballsy.
bold prediction here. But here's the thing, like we've talked about this kind of all year, right? Is we want to find games where there is a sizable difference in the most important facet. And regardless of how Blake Bortles has played, and I think a good bit of that has been due to some things that are generally, not very stable, pass rating under, with play action, kind of, that's not something you can really rely on game to game, particularly when you would expect them to be down. And the kind of those rushing, those random scrambles that he's had, if you kind of assume those regress to the mean and maybe even far past that with the type of scheming that you expect from the Patriots, that huge spread in quarterback play I think is magnified. And Tom Brady, whether it's from a clean pocket or under pressure, top 3 grade among quarterbacks this year. You expect Jacksonville to certainly get some pressure on him, and there's been no one better than Brady. He's been remarkably stable under pressure. Even though we talk about that being an unstable stat, he's been, pretty darn steady over the past 3 years. This year, he's the only quarterback with a big-time throw percentage in the double digits under pressure. The man is just, super pliable, obviously. And those are the types of things that, look, 8 points doesn't faze me a whole lot.
Feet don't fail me now, as Marshall Mathers once said.
There's nothing like getting a good Eminem quote in here. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for me, there's no vomit on my sweater at this moment. Could happen at some point. There's a little sweat, but no vomit.
Have your knees ever been weak?
The knees are strong. I'm in peak pliability at this moment, but we still have a few hours to go before game time. So who knows? I will not be having any of my dear mother's spaghetti, but that's probably
Oh
for
man,
the best.
I've been looking forward to Mrs. Shahuri's spaghetti, but ultimately, we
is that the first mom joke on this wholesome family podcast?
And the last. Okay, so we've picked the Patriots minus a short number against Atlanta and minus a medium number against Oakland, minus a gigantic number against Miami. And then last week they weren't obviously our lock of the week, but they were one of our decently sized picks in our spread pick segment against Tennessee, minus 13.5. We've backed the Patriots all year. They haven't really hurt us. We're going to continue that way. 8 points. Jacksonville, 10th in our PFF ELO ratings. There's a huge question of whether or not they should be even in the AFC Championship game. The Patriots, a bona fide championship caliber team. Let's go with the fundamentals here. Patriots, the majority of sample paths here have the Patriots sort of running away with this one, so let's go with it.
And I think you bring up an interesting point, not to diverge back into analysis here, but that game, I think publicly, the Pittsburgh-Jacksonville game, Jacksonville's a huge winner in that from the public perception. I think this line, like our model has it at, more of a double-digit spread. That's probably where it belongs. And there's, some public love out there, on Jacksonville. Tom Brady, God only knows if his hand is still even attached to his arm after that gruesome injury that I'm sure
doesn't matter.
Yeah, left-handed Tom Brady still a 10-point favorite. But there are some things that I think are pushing this number down a little bit. That's why it's at -8, and we're happy to snap it up. We'll take the Pats. By the way, if you want some deeper analysis, and I have uncovered some potential doomsday trends for your consumption, check out our picks column. Trust me, you'll want to do it. It's on the website, profootballfocus.com. Grab yourself a PFF Edge or Elite subscription. Make sure you get that QB annual. And of course, subscribe to the podcast. Eric, let's close them out with what we do every time.
We lock it up every time. So lock it up.
Make it happen. See you guys next week.